Vanilla monsters. In the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, they typically have no innate value. They don't do anything on their own. However, in the earliest days of Yu-Gi-Oh, effect monsters were few and far between, and a lot of games just came down to smashing your numbers against your opponents. Because of this, a select few monsters would solidify themselves as the powerhouses of the early metagame. Silver Fang is just strictly better than Two-Mouth Dark Ruler. Today we're going to look at the history of these monsters, why some were played over others, and why they were even played at all. As a disclaimer, I'm only going to be covering the first 12 years of the game's history, from roughly 2002 to 2014. The reason for the time frame is these are the years I played the game, and I don't want to give secondhand information about decks I've never played. So sorry to all the brilliant Fusion fans. This also means I miss out on all the cool vanilla pendulum monsters. Its name is Kunshafter. I've also decided to exclude Gemini monsters from the video, as for me, they're mostly effect monsters. Yeah, you could say Neos Alias effect doesn't matter, but there are plenty of effect monsters like Trigon, Dragunity Corseska, and Influence Dragon, where this also applies. I'll also not be covering any extra deck monsters. Yeah, Gaia Knight and Gemini Pearl are cool cards, but they don't really fit the spirit of the video. So with all apologies to all the instant fusion targets and the magical scientist FTK, let's go draw some bricks. In Yugi-Kaiba format, Yu-Gi-Oh's first official format, which only includes the first two starter decks, as well as the Legend of Blue Eyes, is all about getting the biggest monster on board as efficiently as possible. For the non-tribute monsters, we're looking at Giant Soldier Stone, Aquamador, and Mystical Elf for their 2k defense, and for attack points, we have Battle Ox, Neo the Magic Swordsman, and the Undisputed King, La Jin, the Mystical Genie of the Lamp. 1800 was no joke, and some creative players have taken to running Great White and Umi as a strategy to artificially inflate their stats to 1800. For tribute summons, the heavy hitters are Judge Man and Summon Skull. These cards are easily summoned to the field thanks to the help of Soul Exchange. While most decks are running a full 3 copies of Fissure and Trap Hole, as well as the one-ofs Raigeki and Dark Hole, sticking monsters was very difficult, so running monsters that required 2 tributes was out of the question. Unless we're not tribute summoning them. While not considered to be on the same level as the Soul Control deck, Dragon Turbo was an easy way to cheese out big monsters, thanks to Lord of D and the Flute of Summoning Dragon. For Curse of Dragon, the difference between it and Summon Skull was surprisingly marginal, as its main job in the deck was to clear the level 4 normal summons. The big issue Curse of Dragon faces is when playing against the stall deck, which is nothing more than 2k defenders in hopes of winning by deck out. It does this by playing over 40 cards, as well as waiting for your opponent to have a larger hand than you, and using card destruction to get through their deck quicker. Next, we're going to move on to Critter format and the introduction of Metal Raiders. This set would feature some very prominent cards that would become staples, like Mirror Force, Sangan, and Solemn Judgment. For our purposes, those cards don't really matter. What does matter is that Metal Raiders included 7 colored fish. This is another 1800 vanilla monster that made the 1700 vanilla monsters completely obsolete, as there were now a potential 6 counters to them in the main board, and frankly, there were just much better monsters to play like Mass Sorcerer and White Magical Hat. And when I said Sangan wasn't relevant, I wasn't being completely honest. See, Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest were only semi-limited on the ban list at the time. So combined with Last Will, this allowed players to thin through their decks and eventually assemble all 5 pieces of Exodia. It also utilized Thunder Dragon to give players a tribute summonable monsters that could trigger Last Will, Witch, and Sangan when their opponent refused to attack, as well as it thinned the deck. A few months later, in September 2002, we'd see the release of Tournament Pack 1 and Mechanical Chaser. 1850. This was the card to finally supplant the almighty La Jin. Chaser's reign of terror would last 6 months, but in Labyrinth of Nightmare, the 1900 threshold would be crossed by Gemini Elf. 1900 would be the last meta-relevant attack point threshold in the game's history, as by the time it was broken, vanilla monsters were no longer being used for their stats alone, and it wouldn't be long before cards like Archfiend Soldier would be joining the 1900 club. Before we move on to the next section, it wouldn't be very thorough of me to not include Hugo Adame's 4th place deck from Shonen Jump Anaheim in 2004, which included a single copy of Dark Magician. Yugioh was playing 2 copies of Skilled Dark Magician, which isn't uncommon due to it reaching the 1900 attack point threshold, as well as being a dark monster for BLS. What was uncommon was actually playing the Dark Magician in your deck. See, before this point, the vanilla monsters people were playing, they actually wanted to draw, but Hugo never wanted to draw as Dark Magician. While it could be summoned from the hand, it's much more beneficial for Skilled Dark to summon Dark Magician directly from the deck. This is likely the beginning for what vanilla monsters would become in the future, and is a good precursor to what we're going to see for the rest of the video. So if we're not playing vanilla monsters for their stats, then why are we playing them? Enter Demise, King of Armageddon. Demise is a monster with a very simple effect. Pay 2,000 life points, destroy every other card on the field. But what if after we destroyed every other card on the field, we just won the game? This is the Demise OTK. The Demise OTK had a few different lines to reach the necessary 8,000 damage, but they all started with Advanced Ritual Art, which thankfully for us, requires vanilla monsters. Metal Armor Bug, Insect Knight, and Neo Bug are the vanillas of choice, and they're important for two reasons. They're insects, and they have very specific levels. Their levels matter because of Advanced Ritual Art, which requires the levels to exactly equal the monster we're ritual summoning. Demise being a level 8 monster lets any two of the level 4s, or low Metal Armor Bug, fulfill ARA's requirements. The insect part matters because of Doom Dozer, which requires us to banish 2 insects from your graveyard to summon it. ARA is doing the heavy lifting, summoning Demise to the field, as well as setting up our graveyard to summon out Doom Dozer. All that's left is to either use Metamorphosis to turn Demise into Cyber Twin Dragon, or Megamorph to double Doom Dozer's attack, and that's exactly 8k damage. Throughout 2007, this combo would remain largely the same. In September, Metamorphosis will be banned and replaced in the combo by Swing of Memories, but the vanilla monster stayed the same. This would change in 2009 with the release of Black Salvo and the infamous Dark Strike Fighter. ARA would still start the combo, but now we're sending our old friend Mechanical Chaser to the graveyard and summoning him back with Black Salvo. We would then use Salvo and Chaser to make Dark Strike Fighter, attack with both, then launch them both off with his effect for exactly 8,000 damage. So, fun fact about this combo, I had an AI do this to me in the Xbox Live Arcade game Decade Duels on turn 1. I was playing some bad hero deck just for fun, but ended on 2 fusions and Mirror Force, and then the whole thing just happened to me. It's pretty funny looking back, and I'm pretty sure this was one of the first times I'd ever been OTK by anyone. Go to hell, Kuwabara. Next, we're going to jump ahead to what is currently the most popular retro format, Edison format, which took place in April of 2010. There's really only one deck that benefits from vanilla monsters, and that is Dragon Turbo. Dragon Turbo utilizes both Blue Eyes White Dragon and Flameveil Guard as draw power. Flameveil Guard is used as discard fodder for cards of continents, and Blue Eyes is used for trade-in. Blue Eyes is even searchable off of Whitestone, which in itself is a consonance target. These discarded dragons are then used in tandem with Super Rejuvenation to replenish the hand in the end phase. Blue Eyes is also relevant for its attack points, as it can be summoned from the hand or graveyard by Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon, which is the monster we're ultimately looking for to see with our draw power. Now, this technically isn't the only Edison deck that utilizes a vanilla monster. Fish OTK has recently replaced Matabo Shark with our Lord and Savior Tongyo. Tongyo is relevant for its stats, but in the opposite direction. Tongyo has less than 1500 attack points, which means when Coelacanth summons multiple fish from the deck, it won't be destroyed by a Bottomless Trapple, allowing you to keep it and Fishborg Blaster alive for synchro plays. Just shortly after Edison, we'd see the release of the Shining Darkness and Herald of Perfection, another ritual monster that will utilize Advanced Ritual Art. This time we're utilizing light fairy monsters to take advantage of both Honest and Archlord Christia. Essentially, we're attempting to make Yu-Gi-Oh! A one-player game, as Herald plus Christia pretty much made the game unplayable for your opponent. ARA will usually start by sending a Gyakuteno Megami, or any combination of Happy Lovers and Moki Mokis. The vanillas in the grave then become targets for Dark Factory of Mass Production, which allows us to add back vanilla monsters from our grave to our hand. These are then used as fodder for Herald of Perfection, which prevents the opponent from playing the game. So, the fairies and Herald are used for all three purposes besides their stats: their level, their attribute, and their type. The Shining Darkness would also give us our next relevant vanilla monster, although it would take the release of Starstrike Blast and Formula Synchron for it to really take off. Gen X Undyne is a monster that allows you to send any water monster from your deck to the graveyard in order to add Gen X Controller from your deck to your hand. I know some of you didn't expect to see Gen X Controller here so early. Not unlike Swap Frog, we can use Gen X Undyne to send Treeborn Frog directly from our deck to the graveyard. Additionally, it can do what Swap has always dreamed of: sending Fishborg Blaster. So a typical turn after setting up your graveyard looks like this: revive Treeborn Frog in your standby phase, discard the Gen X controller that was added off the Undyne to summon back the Fishborg Blaster, use the two monsters to synchro for Formula Synchron, draw a card, then tribute it for a Monarch. Bonus points if you can utilize enemy controller to take your opponent's monster as the Monarch tribute, and then use it and the Monarch for a synchro play. Now for the last section, we've typically just been sending and discarding the vanillas for other effects. What about vanilla monsters that we actually want to summon? The latter half of 2011 would see the release of Exceed monsters, bringing new life to some older cards, including the Agent of Creation Venus and her favorite vanilla tag-along, Mystical Shine Ball. Early on in the Exceed lifespan, the only Rank 2 monster available was Gachi Gachi Gantetsu, but that alone was enough to catapult Agents to the top of the tier list for decks in the early part of the September 2011 ban list. Venus loaded the field with Shine Balls, which we converted into Trishula with the help of Agent of Mystery Earth, as well as set up the graveyard for big pushes with monsters like Master Hyperion, Archlord Christia, and the newly unbanned Blackluster Soldier, Envoy of the Beginning. This stay at the top will be relatively short-lived, as a new, much cuter threat was waiting just around the corner. Releasing in November of 2011, Rescue Rabbit will become the de facto vanilla facilitator for the next few years. Rabbit allowed a player to summon 2 level 4 or lower vanilla monsters from their deck by banishing it from the field. The overwhelming majority of players use Rabbit to either summon 2 copies of Sabersaurs or Kabazals and immediately overlaying them into either a Volzar Lagia or a Volzar Dolka. These were 2 strong Exceed monsters that shine in a metagame that was far from overflowing with negates. This wouldn't be the only deck of 2012 to utilize vanilla monsters. Heretics were a fast-paced OTK deck that could tribute copies of other Heretics from the hand for their effects. When any of them are tributed for any reason, they can summon a vanilla dragon from the hand, deck, or graveyard, but its attack and defense becomes 0. The most popular vanillas would be Luster Dragon and Wattel Dragon, as they are both level 6. These vanilla monsters would then overlay for Heretic Dragon King of a Tomb, which would summon even more dragons from the deck. A typical Heretic combo would use Sue and Nebthed to clear the opponent's board, and then end the game with 2 Gaia Chargers and either a Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon, Scrap Dragon, or Force Focus for exactly 8,000 damage. Let's jump ahead a few months towards the end of 2012. That fall we would see the release of both the Atlantean and Mermail archetypes, 2 water archetypes that were designed to work together in tandem. See, the Atlantean monsters had effects when they were sent to the graveyard to activate the effect of a water monster, and the Mermails had effects which required water monsters to be sent to the graveyard to activate their effects. A match made in heaven. However, Mermails weren't the only water monsters that needed other water monsters to activate their effects. Welcome back Gen X Undyne and its vanilla counterpart, Gen X Controller. Undyne allowed for the access of Atlantean monsters without needing to draw them. Cards like Abyss Megalo and Abyss Bike needed to discard them from the hand, while Undyne could send them directly from the deck. This allowed the normal summon of an Undyne to turn into either the destruction of a face-up or face-down card with Infantry and Marksman, but also the search of a Sea Serpent monster with the help of Atlantean Dragoons. These cards, along with Deep Sea Diva, allowed for the setup of a pretty easy OTK, with Dragoons being able to search all the cards needed. All we need is a Megalo and a Diva, and we have 8,000 damage. Summon Megalo and Diva, which brings out a Marksman. We then tribute the Diva for Megalo, which allows him to attack twice. We then attack with that Marksman, which summons out a copy of Atlantean Dragoons, which attacks for an additional 1,800 damage. All that's left is our 2 attacks with Megalo, and we've easily done 8,000 damage. And that does sound degenerate, but that is nothing on our next OTK.
So you activate this, activate Chain Link Trail, then you activate its effect, and then you banish those 4. This guy. This is going to be my banished. Here's my deck. You guys see that, right? Yeah. It's hard to do upside down. Okay, so his effect activates. Just go back into the deck, and then you remove him again for a second one. His effect activates. You go back into the deck, and you overlay. You stop next. You shoot them for 2,000. And then you remove this from the graveyard, and this from play, and this falls off. For a Gaia. That's why Gaia is important.
Okay, that makes sense.
You remove this and this. For either Gaia or Shining. I usually do Shining just because I only have one other Gaia, but I'm pretty sure you can do either, it doesn't matter. And then you remove these 4 for the 3rd Electrum. And his effect activates, and it puts it back all these 4, and then the original turn.
Oh my god.
Like I can show you, and then I'll show you the second time. So now you have a floating Shining, and you basically do it the same way, but you want to make sure you get value out of, like, you don't want to waste your Shinings, right? Because otherwise you'd end with the multipliers. So once you have the second one, you go remove again for him, activate his effect, go back, overlay again, You goosed off him for the second time. So
Okay.
And then you remove. Make a guy. You gotta make guy or shining, it doesn't matter. So now you have 2 shinings. And whereas the loop would like go like that, well, you just remove both these for a 3rd shining. And then you remove those and do that. And then it actually becomes a loop because you get back to the 2nd stage. So you always have the floating shine. So you end up going through them. And then you can do the same thing where it's a Gaia. Like making Gaia and shine doesn't really matter, but the only reason why I make Gaia is because of this. And then you have to make shine when it's 2 lights.
What you just saw was Robert Boyajian explaining the Elemental Hero Electrum OTK, a deck that utilizes the 3 vanilla Elemental Hero monsters, as well as Elemental Hero Bubbleman, to fuse into Elemental Hero Electrum. The combo then uses 2 Electrums to make Super Dreadnought, Rail Cannon, Gustav Max, wash, rinse, and repeat. While it does seem that all these recent vanilla monsters are just cogs in the OTK machine, not all of them are using degenerate OTKs. Some of the decks are just degenerate. Enter Evil Swarms, a deck designed around making Evil Swarm Ophion, protecting Evil Swarm Ophion, and not allowing your opponent to play the game. Evil Swarm Heliotrope would be the next monster to be summoned by Rescue Rabbit. Until the release of Evil Swarm Kyrkion, Rabbit would be the lone 1-card Ophion in the deck, and even in a post-Kyrkion world, Rabbit and Heliotrope would always remain a key part of the deck. Evil Swarm wouldn't be the only new deck to utilize Rescue Rabbit. Fire Fist, a Beast Warrior based archetype, will combine both the Sabersaurus from the Dino Rabbit deck and a Beast Warrior vanilla to create Dino Fist. Gene Warped Warwolf would be the most commonly used Beast Warrior, as its 2000 attack was the highest available at the time. However, some players did utilize Vorse Raider. See, when Vorse Raider was on the field with any fire formation spell, its attack would be boosted to 2000, and since it's a dark monster, it would be an eligible target for Deck Devastation Virus, a very strong side deck card at the time. Now, these were new decks that were utilizing Rescue Rabbit, but what about old ones? Gladiator Beasts were an archetype that had been around for about 5 years at this point, but it's about time Andal got his time in the spotlight. Another 1900 attack vanilla, this time being used as an instant rank 4, but with the added benefit of turning on your war chariots for those pesky Abyss Lens. It could even be sent back to the deck by tagging out for a Geyserius or Herc to be used again with the 2nd copy of Rabbit. Full Power Dragon Rulers. One of the most powerful decks in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! Utilized a lone vanilla monster, Flamevell Guard. Guard wasn't played for the same reasons as it was in Edison's Dragon Turbo. Here we're utilizing it, yes, because it's a dragon, but also because it's a level 1 Fire Dragon tuner. It being a tuner allowed all of your level 7 dragons to turn into a wide array of level 8 Synchro monsters. And no level 8 Synchro was more important than Crimson Blader. The threat of Blader was very prevalent in how the mirror was played. Leaving a monster on the field that it could prey upon with its effect could very well end the game, especially in the mirror match. The other important part of Guard, its fire attribute, allowed it to be used for Blaster's effect, which could destroy key cards like Vanity's Emptiness in the mirror and Jaugen the Spiritualist in the Spellbook matchup. These were both cards that heavily tilted the game and were key parts of the 2 most popular decks of the format by a large margin. On later Forbidden Limited lists, the baby dragons would get banned and the big rulers would all eventually be limited. This didn't stop the deck from remaining competitive, and the other vanilla from Edison's Dragon Turbo would return, this time with help from a new card, Dragon Shrine. Dragon Shrine worked as additional copies of Foolish Burial, but allowed you to load up your graveyard with 2 dragons instead of just 1, but only if the initial dragon sent for its effect was a vanilla monster. This card, along with the Mythic Dragons, allowed for the rulers to remain competitive even before the release of Soul Charge. And lastly, Mythic Rulers weren't the only dragon deck to utilize Flamevell Guard. Erratics would re-enter the mix, but with a new level 6 vanilla monster, Labradorite Dragon. Labradorite Dragon had one advantage over Wassail and Luster Dragon. It was a tuner. This allowed for the deck to keep its easy access to a tomb, but also make Star Eater with any of the level 5 erratic monsters. Now there is some debate on whether or not Labradorite is the correct vanilla to play in this version of Heretics, as a card like Tyhone 2 could use its fire attribute in tandem with Blaster, similar to Guard, to destroy key cards in certain matchups. This concludes the history of meta-relevant vanilla monsters in the Draw 6 era of Yu-Gi-Oh! What's your favorite vanilla monster? What's your favorite flavor text? Did I miss any monsters? Feel free to let me know in the comments below, and I thank you all very much for watching and making it to the end of the video. Take care.